Hey, good afternoon, everyone. We're now at the fourth episode of Privacy Fridays and FightBack Cybersecurity. We have a very interesting topic today, so please stand by. While we, first deal with the updates on what has happened in data privacy and cybersecurity for the past few days. With me right now are my colleagues from NADPOP and PH-CERT. Beginning with our most senior, magandang hapon, Dito Averia. Yun, inayos ni camera.
Ayan.
Oh.
Magandang hapon, Sam. Magandang hapon sa mga na sumusubaybay sa atin.
Yep, welcome back online dito. We're glad na naayos na yung internet connection mo. So, maraming salamat sa telco provider mo. Hindi natin mention ko sino, pero object siya ng ating speaker sa isang kanyang post mamaya. So, pag-uusapan natin. Okay, kasama din natin si Sir Engels Antonio, ang ating Cybersecurity 101 speaker and also co-host. Magandang hapon, Sir Engels. Kumusta?
Yeah, magandang hapon. Blessed weekend sa lahat.
Tama-tama, no? Biyernes na naman. Nandito na naman tayo.
Tambayan ulit.
Tama. Ito po, galing po sa kabilang network. Lumipat po dito sa BounceBack Network. Yan, Abet de la Cruz. Magandang hapon, Sir Abet. Kumusta na?
Magandang hapon po sa lahat. Sa mga nanonood, nakikinig. Thank you very much for continuing to be with us. Good afternoon, Engels, Lito, Sam. Hope you're all doing better.
Salamat din, Abet, nakarating ka. No? Si Arnie nga pala, nagpaalam sa atin, ating female co-host, merong presentation ngayon sa Hong Kong. So, ipasok pala natin.
Lumipat na sa Hong Kong?
Lumipat na, hindi. So, pag-usapan natin itong sa NPC update. Pero, i-introduce na natin yung speaker natin kasi magandang nakasama siya dito sa discussion, di ba? So, again, we'll welcome Atty. Euston Acero, our speaker for today.
Hello! Ayun! Yes. Kala ko malilate.
Ganda naman ng setup niya, no? Talagang ready. Again, as usual, we're going to look at the updates from the National Privacy Commission. No? Medyo manipis ang update nila this week kasi 3 lang yung nakita kong dito sa kanilang site. Pero yung una, napaka-significant It's about the ASEAN, they're encouraging, ito yung press release nila, yung cross-border tools to boost Philippines' digital competitiveness, no? And then ito yung press release kanila. Sorry, hindi nyo mabasa masyado, It named yung model contract clauses or MCCs and the data management framework. Diba? These are actually standards issued by the ASEAN, and then which was accepted by the ASEAN countries. Again, Atty. Kiko, ikaw very familiar ka dito sa mga standards na to, di ba? So when you're with the commission, these were already being discussed. Ano tingin mo? MCC saka DMF, data management framework. To be used by local
yung MCCs kasi that's for trans-border flows. Hindi masyadong issue kasi dito kasi wala tayong issue sa trans-border flows, pero if you're having hosting issues say in Singapore, it might be better to have again these model contract clauses. The thing with model contract clauses, you just have to be super careful na you don't exclude particular jurisdictions, no? Pero ASEAN has has model contract clauses. The thing is, model contract clauses are very they're voluntary. So it means na, well, kung gusto nyo, lagay nyo. But it varies talaga depending on your on your risk appetite. Pero what we've done is we go to jurisdiction recognition. So we adopt a form of these model contract clauses when we have when we deal with Singaporean companies or when we deal with trans-ASEAN data flows.
What I noticed about this press release with the NPC is that they really are emphasizing that digitalization really is an engine for growth for companies. And at the heart of that, you need to protect the data privacy of your data subjects, right? So, ito, kinakolot nila, given the great shift to digitalization due to pandemic, the union can exceed 240 billion. Economic data, di ba? Sinasabi nila, this will really spur economic development. Okay? Lito, in your experience ba, di ba, on standards, I mean, sabi nga ni Atty. Kiko, voluntary to eh. So, what are the benefits pag you exert additional effort and you adhere to these standards?
Well, adhering to standards, you can defines your expectations. So, walang surprises if you adhere to standards. That's one. Second is regularity, may establish this regularity of your transactions, for example. So often those are the two advantages that I can see. It's the same in of course in adopting security standards. You have a well-defined framework, that allows you to define your expectations. So often yun yung dalawang nakikita ko, regularity and expectation setting.
Correct, no? Engels, Abet, anything to add to what Lito and Atty. Kiko said?
That they've already spoken of, but tama naman si Sir Lito, no? At least there's a baseline to start with, and that's the importance of standards and circulars like this para if we do transactions, sabi nga ni Atty. Kiko, for other nations, then we're talking on a common ground. Yes.
Tama.
Yeah.
Okay, Engels?
Aside from that, kahit sinasabi nga natin hindi naman mandatory yung iba, at least you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Napaka-importante nun eh. Because sometimes we just go our own ways, no? Ito pinag-isipan na eh. So magandang i-adapt siya on top of whatever is more appropriate for your organization.
Tama, no? Actually, magandang benchmark siya, no? Kasi nga, well, in the news right now, the Philippines is being benchmarked against other countries worldwide, di ba? Ano kaya ang rank natin sa data privacy compliance?
Malagay ko hindi naman siguro huli, no? Angat tayo dyan.
Somewhere out there.
Yun, tama. Wala naman tayo doon sa extremes.
Hindi porket voluntary is, well, kasi tendency natin voluntary, hindi naman kailangan. Hanggat hindi something na mape-penalize ka, hindi natin ginagawa. Pero, if you're really serious about best practice, kahit hindi siya mandatory, gawin mo na lang nevertheless, no? At least you're erring on the side of caution, ika.
Ito na. Nandito na eh, di ba? I mean, well-defined siya. Tama nga. Ginawa na ng iba eh. Mga mas matatalino at mas matataba ang utak. Di ba? Sabi nga nila, di ba? So, i-adapt mo na lang.
Parang in-adapt nila yung binding commercial clauses, binding contract clauses ng GDPR. But this is more this is more transaction based. So correct. Yung if your company is smaller, tapos yung cloud hosting provider mo medyo makulit, pwede kang mag-insist dito sa sa model contract clauses para at least alam mong fair na siya between the two of you.
Correct, no? Saka maganda rin, di ba? ASEAN is functioning as a regional economic group talaga because of these moves, no? So, and then again, di ba, we're competing against other regional economic groups also, we're also cooperating with them. Incidentally, we're also within APEC, no? So, may sarili ring
Yeah.
APAC pala, APAC,
Yes.
sorry. That has its own, no? Saka na pag-usapan yan, medyo mas malaki yun Pero ito nga, again, we're just reacting to this press release from the NPC. Again, complying to regional standards to boost your digital competitiveness, especially right now, a lot of companies are in their digital transformation journey. So, itong pangalawa actually nakakagulat din, nakakatuwa. Yung contact center ng bayan. Okay? So, si Civil Service Commission nagpagtayo ng nag-establish ng contact center ng bayan. And then based dun sa Republic Act 11032, otherwise known as the Ease of Doing Business and Efficient Government Service Delivery Act of 2018. Okay? So, ayan. Na-encounter nyo na ba to? Any one of you is familiar with this? Tingnan natin, ha?
Ano yan? Yan yung pumalit sa yung ibang
One-stop shop.
provisions tawag to? ARTA.
Tama, oo.
Yeah.
Pero ba't si Civil Service Commission ang nag-lead nito?
For the speed of transaction.
Yung ARTA, that's another agency na gusto rin nating tingnan.
Iba pa rin yan.
Oo. Ito,
So,
yung direct hotline na. Oo.
Kaya ang important dyan, may citizens charter. So sa labas ng government office, merong may timelines kung gaano katagal yung turnaround time.
Parang SLAs, no? SLA siya, no?
Yes.
Oo, tama. For citizen service. Maganda to, actually. Uy, kanina yung tango na yun.
Bibigyan na ng tao, kanina yun.
Pahingi naman. Narinig namin. Okay, again, positive to. Magandang news to. Okay, pa-order naman po ng 5 taho dito sa mga host ng Privacy Friday. Nakakatawa naman siguro mga taho. Oh. And ito rin, this is the last post na bago na hindi natin nataka last week, yung dealing with privacy in times of disasters and national emergencies. In celebration of July pala is National Disaster Resilience Month. So, man-made and natural disasters ang ating kailangang paghandaan, di ba? So, and even in the practice of privacy and cybersecurity, itong dalawang to ay pinaghahandaan natin. And then, di ba, ang ating panlaban dito yung business continuity and disaster recovery programs. Yan. So, Attorney Kiko, meron kaming gustong i-discuss.
Okay.
Talon tayo sa tambayan ng ating kaibigan si Jam Jacob sa Privacy PH.
Si Jam. Ayan.
Ayan, ito maganda pag-usapan to, di ba?
Ayan.
Yan. So,
mainit na mainit.
Nag-post po si Attorney Kiko, isa pong tambayan din namin online sa privacy.ph. Ito, basahin ko na muna, Attorney Kiko, ha? You do not tell someone exercising the right to access, rectification, erasure, and blocking for 2 weeks now, all caps, to disregard the effects of an integrity issue. At the very least, that's a 700 million peso fine. If this happened next month, you should be scared of those fines. Ito, sa mahaba. Sa mga kaibigan natin.
Pinag-usapan natin yung files last week, di ba?
Oo. Tinanggal ko na yung offending party, pero
pero nabasa ko.
Nabasa ko rin. Sabi ko, magandang pag-usapan ngayon yan.
Yes.
Nandun tayo next week, di ba? Nandun tayo next week, Attorney Kiko. Next Friday.
Nandun tayo next week.
Ito request ni Abet. Hindi pala. Request ni dito na pag-usapan daw natin. So,
okay. Kasi, it just highlights the importance na it's 3 weeks to D-Day for Fine Day. And right now, you should be looking at your third-party processes. You should be looking at your touch points with your data subjects to see if they have effective and available avenues for relief pagdating sa data subject rights. Pag wala yun, problema siya. Nasa di ba? 5%.
Correct.
Of 1 to 5% of the So in this case, may inaccurate data. So, 'di ba, inaccurate data happens eh. That's why the Data Privacy Act allows data subjects to come in and say na, oy, controller, mali yung data mo. Palitan mo yan. Kawawa yung parties involved. Okay. Pero if it's if the issue dinaan mo na sa mabuting usapan tapos wala nangyayari, there's an issue. And you can only look at that if you exercise kaya yung pillar number 5 ng NPC is you need to implement breach drills. Kasama yan. What if there's a data subject that complains about your about a certain process? And that's how di ba, isang guideline yan ng NPC. Malalaman mo if you have a breach if dumami yung complaints against you bigla. Yung mga breach na di mo alam. So, parang bounce back. How do you bounce back from it? Siguro isa pang yan. Isa pang episode yan.
Oo, tama. Oo.
Yes.
Ito I have a feeling na they haven't yet implemented an identity management system, no? Kasi mukhang nahihirapan yung kanilang data privacy team to respond to request. That's my that's my gut feel on this issue. Kaya ang bagal ng kanilang responses. So imagine mo dalawang linggo na, di ba? So coming from a big company,
mga 10 days. Dalawang linggo.
Oh.
Kasama naman sa CRM yan yung kasi client facing yan Di ba? Customer facing function yan. So dapat meron silang well-defined procedures on how to handle certain issues raised by customers.
Correct.
May magandang comment dito sa
system nila. Kaya hindi siya ma-escalate sa susunod na level.
Pwede, may comment.
Hindi, nag-leave daw yung DPO
Ayun, nabasa ko dito, naka-leave pala yung DPO nila.
May nagko.
Hindi mo bawal mag-leave ang DPO. Bawal na mag-leave ang DPO din.
Hindi, again, nasa procedure nila yan. Kung siyempre, hindi naman pwedeng hindi mag-leave yung DPO. Kasama yan sa benefits naman ng empleyado, di ba? Meron silang succession rule.
Dapat may succession plan.
Yes.
Dapat may succession.
Tanggalin na natin
your DP program should be running with the yung may responsibility talaga for the implementation should be the process owners. DPs taga-sita. So if may problem nga bawa dyan, so access rights, integrity issue, ang may problema talaga dyan, yung customer contact information system nila. Tsaka yung sales team. Paano sila naging interface with the customer database? How do they create accounts? How do they ensure the accuracy of the accounts? Yan.
Well, kita nyo na, if a big company is struggling, di ba? In upholding privacy rights, paano pa kaya mga maliliit na company, di ba? So,
isegue ko rin yung sa gobyerno. Isegue ko rin yung sa gobyerno, lalo na ngayon, yung sa pandemya, ang daming nangongolekta ng information about the citizens. So, paano din hinahandle ng gobyerno ito? At paano kung may similar issue with the government agency, how will that agency respond? Di ba? Kung sa private sector na well-defined na nga yung processes, hindi makasagot or hindi makarespond ka agad-agad, paano naman sa mga sa gobyerno, lalo na sa local government units na maliliit, na hindi I don't know, kung may training na ba yung LGUs on the Data Privacy Act, the processes that need to be put in place, di ba?
I think ang problema sa DBM, they're looking at data privacy as an attached function, not as a separate office, which it should be.
Kahit forever na problema din yan sa IT function. Diba? Walang plantilla positions, for example, yung CIO, hindi well defined. Di lalo na pagka nag-define ka ng CISO function at saka DPO function.
Wala na.
Wala na.
Tapos
Baka kaya ma-address nung new law, baka yung amended law, baka pwede ma-address yan.
it's also how they're supposed to present their IT plans through for the next 3 years. Diba?
Right.
That cycle is too long for the way the tech updates itself.
Yes, agree.
Your IT plan is at most 1 year. And then you reevaluate kasi next year, ano na yung difference? Yung difference between a 9th gen Intel and the 10th gen Intel ang ngayo. Kasi you have to look at the other providers like CPU providers like AMD. They finally overcome their heat issue. So cheaper, faster, better. Tapos your specs still say Intel. Problema yan. And you're locked in.
Pag-upgrade sa Windows 11.
Oh, yun. Marami sa hindi makaka-upgrade sa Windows 11. So security, national security risk yan.
Correct. Sige,
We have to discuss.
Shoutout sa mga taga-Microsoft, mga dati nating colleagues yan, Abet. No?
Buti na lang yung laptop ko ready for Windows 11 na-assess na.
Akala ko pa naka-Mac ka, dito.
Meron din Mac.
Parang din ba?
Yan ang consult may Mac tsaka may PC, di ba?
Oo. Akala ko PlayStation lang ang sa'yo, naka-issue sa'yo, PlayStation. Di ba? PS5. So, yung mga batiin natin yung ating mga kaibigan na nanonood. Yan. Ma'am Goody, magandang hapon. Yan, Engels. Oo.
Yes. So,
thank you for
by the way,
watching.
bro, Sam. Singit ko na lang. Total, acknowledge mo na si Goody. Pwede bang mag-share ng konting announcement bago mag-start si Atty. Kiko?
Oo, sige.
Para sa mga viewers natin, the Philippine National Police needs 100 IT officers.
Correct.
So if you are
Ayan.
21 to 30 years old na IT professional and you would like to be a police lieutenant via lateral entry, please punta po kayo sa Information Technology Management Service. Hanggang July 13 lang po ito. So maganda po ang benefits actually ng police lieutenant ngayon. You start at 40K. So,
Tama.
at marami pa pong training na ibibigay ang PNP sa inyo. So,
Ang taas na, okay. Approve.
So, mga friends sa ITMS, please, marami pong pupunta dyan.
Mukhang makikipagagawan ang anti-cybercrime group, Engels, because we need about 800 sa ECG.
Tama, oo.
No?
Tama. Minsan lang
mga
to,
cybercrime
brother
investigators.
Lito. Yes.
Yan.
Minsan lang po itong quota na to mabuksan, kaya go natin. Go po.
Hanapin natin yung link mamaya, ipo-post ko dito sa ating comment section para we can go directly, Baka our friends from ITMS, can you please post, you can actually post it dito sa comments yung kung paano mag-apply ang ating mga kababayan para maging cyber cop. Di ba? Yun ang ating pakikita nyo kami doon.
Iba yung sa cyber cop, iba yung sa cyber cop, iba yung sa ITMS.
Oo.
Iba pa yun. Iba pala yun.
Ang ITMS, yan ang wind beneath my wings that enables PNP to digitally transform. Ayan.
Yes, napakaganda, Atty. Kiko. Salamat, Atty. Kiko. Very nice.
Ito naman, kaibigan natin si JJ Hinove, magandang gabi. Yan, yung show natin sa blockchain, yan. Siguro baka gusto yung mag-cross guest naman doon. Magandang hapon, Sir JJ. At ito, Atty. Kiko, special mention ka. Yung isa sa mga estudyante mo ng ating regular listener. Yan, si Angel Celis.
Hello.
Pasaway bang estudyante si Angel Celis, Atty. Kiko? Model student ba? Model student.
Model student yan.
Si Arnel po is sa mga volunteer din natin sa NADPOP. Magandang hapon, Arnel. Thank you for joining us. So, yan, hindi na natin patagalin. Pinainit lang natin yung entablado, the digital, kaya Atty. Kiko. Kasi eksakto po yung topic ngayon. Ito po yung isa sa pinakamahirap gawin sa 5 pillars ng Data Privacy Act, yung Privacy Impact Assessment. Marami tawag PIA, PIA, di ba? So, bahala na kayo kung ano pero again, Atty. Kiko, we'll leave the floor with you. Isi-set na natin yung
Sige.
At isa-isa kaming mag-aalisa kami sa isa.
Sige. Bago ako mag-start, magsha-shoutout ako. Atty. Mike Santos, hello. Salamat sa panonood. Si Attorney Mike, yung pumalit sa akin sa Complaints and Investigation Division sa National Privacy Commission. Hello, shout out. Okay, so today we're going to talk about privacy impact assessments and napaka second pillar kasi ito ng privacy ng compliance framework. So napaka-essential niyan. Nung nandun ako sa lahat ng nag-investigate pa ako ng breaches. Halos lahat ng breaches na-trace namin because hindi maayos yung walang foresight. And all of them could have been avoided had there been a proper privacy impact assessment. So, how do you do a privacy impact assessment? So, we'll talk about that today. Syempre, this is the condensed version for a more in-depth and more focused discussion on privacy impact assessments. We have a NADPOP is having a certification course that's available this October through Enderan. So let's get to it. So when you talk about privacy impact assessments, what you're really looking at is you're looking at your entire data processing, and you're looking at it throughout your entire data life cycle. So again, data processing itself covers any operation or set of operations that are performed on personal data. So in that covers the breadth of the entire data life cycle: collection, storage, retrieval, modification, and then destruction. The thing is, the law requires us to understand the risks that are posed by the processing of personal data. So how do you understand the risks that are posed by the processing? You do a privacy impact assessment. Now, other people will tell you, well, you need to do is a gap analysis. But these are just fancy names for the same thing. What you need to understand, again, are the risks posed by the processing. Privacy impact assessments, they differ in the minutiae between privacy enforcement authorities around the world. But the focus is the same. The idea is the same. Why do you need to do it at all ba naman? Because, first of all, it's a tool. It helps you understand all the data life cycles that are within your organization. And then it helps you identify what are the attendant risks in the processing. Because that's what the tool is designed for. And worldwide, it's considered as a best practice in general to just go through it so you can understand what risks you're running. And then it proposes measures to control risks through a structured framework. So when you apply measures that shore up where you're weak, you're not doing it bara-bara style. You can see how it affects everything, and everything has a purpose. Privacy impact assessments give you the structure that help you mold your thinking. When does this need to be done? First, before you fix or set your privacy management program. When you set your privacy management program and you haven't done your PIA, you might have to redo your entire PIA eventually. Because whatever comes out in your PIA, the control framework, that's supposed to be embedded in the privacy management program. I've had some institutions come up to me before asking for advice because they went ahead and put their privacy management program before they put the PIA because they wanted the PIA to be led by the data protection officer. Now, while the data protection officer is part of the PIA process, the process owner is supposed to be the one leading the PIA. The DPO is only there as a resource person. So therefore, the absence of a DPO, of an appointed DPO, should not be an excuse for you not to have a privacy impact assessment. Second, whenever you implement a new process or new technology, the idea here is that if there is anything that fundamentally changes the way that you're processing information, that should be the subject of a new privacy impact assessment, just so you can understand through your framework, through your structured framework, how you are going to attack any challenges that may arise from the use of the new technology. A lot of times when we look at new technology, we're also enamored by the technology that comes out. That we always think about the applications. How are we going to use this technology? How are we going to use this technology to live a better life? But what we don't understand is these technologies often come with risks. Now, these risks, just because there are risks, doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that they have to be managed. Technology is not an apply it and be done with its solution. And anyone who tells you otherwise, they're trying to sell you something. That also happens when you have to scale up an existing process or scale up the use of technology. Sometimes, when done in small batches, technology works. But when you explode, when your user base explodes and your count starts going into the millions, then you'll have problems. Privacy impact assessments can help you simulate those problems and then implement measures to control that and deal with the problem even before they arise. So sometimes we here in the Philippines, what we like to do is we like to put out fires. Privacy impact assessments are there to make sure that you're there putting in the measures even before the fire starts. Before you enter into a data sharing agreement, and that part of that is really important before you enter into a data sharing agreement, especially when the exchange of information is significant. You can consider it as part of your data sharing due diligence prior to implementing any large-scale data collection. So if your institution or your company wants to start using large data sets, or say, and then feed that into an AI, for example, then you should, all the more reason, you should look at a privacy impact assessment and see how that's going to affect things in the future. Because, again, things sometimes are different at scale. I've said this before, and I think I've said it last week. Never before have we been able to look at the big picture and the small picture simultaneously. And in data privacy, the small things matter. Even if there's only one affected data subject because of an error in the processing, then that should be enough to put in some degree of caution. And then finally, prior to outsourcing any type of processing to a service provider. Now, while privacy impact assessments are intrusive, they shouldn't be that alien to the people running the processes so that they consider it as part of business as usual. And that might be able to alleviate some of the pain. So when, again, and we talked about this last week, let's review it again. So when looking at the privacy impact assessment, first you identify your data subjects. Who do you collect data from? And then from there, you look at all the programs, processes, measures, and systems that process their personal data. You can conduct an impact assessment per process. You can conduct it per program. You can conduct it per measure, or you can conduct it per system. System kasi you look at your purpose. A system is a collection of processes, programs, and measures that are aimed toward a single purpose. So it might be beneficial if you look at your data life cycle insofar as it fixes or fulfills one set of purposes. So if there's a different purpose but it draws from the same database, then you can set that aside. But what's important is that you undergo data minimization for that particular purpose. Not only do you have to identify those processes, but you also have to be able to identify the data flow to be able to analyze the gaps for the privacy impact assessment. Once you get the gaps, no, once you've analyzed the gaps, then you can get management approval. And once you have management approval, then you can deploy the appropriate controls. And let's add something. Something I want to emphasize. Okay. Yeah. Now, when you look at your description of data flows, this goes into where your your data inventory. And this is, you see data inventory here then, diba? But this description of data flow within your privacy impact assessment framework is quite important. Okay, so when we say data inventory, there are two things. First, your data inventory is where your data is and what the processes are. So you can call that as a data inventory. When we talk about data inventory here, it's even more specific. Where the data is, how it's stored, and what processes are using it. So when you describe your data flow, you put in first your purpose, then where you find your data. So you can find it in a particular physical location, and within that physical location, what part of that physical structure can you find that data? Then you're supposed to be able to describe the source. For every data field that you have to be able to identify where you got that information. Then you look at the collection procedure and see if it complies with data privacy law. From there, you go into a functional description of your data processing. I think that's the even more specific definition of a data inventory. So we have a list of information repositories and a graphical representation of the physical location. Then you look at your data transfers. You look at your storage and disposal method. And your storage and disposal method becomes important when your data mutates from a physical to a digital form, if that is where your data is being stored and handled. What's important is you keep your single source of truth. Anything else other than the single source of truth has to have its own disposal, immediate disposal, and or archival function. Then you look at who your accountable persons are. And you also look at your existing organizational, technical, and physical security. We'll have more on that later. So once you understand what your data, where your data is, what it is, and what you're using it for, you'll be able to understand your privacy risks. And your privacy risk is the probability that the data processing or other activity involving your data will result in the loss of the rights and freedoms of an individual. So you can adjust that risk level for severity, likelihood, and magnitude. If you look at the Privacy Impact Assessment Guide inside the NPC Toolkit, they assess risk level on a 4 likelihood and likelihood and severity and magnitude are all assessed on severity and magnitude they're treated as the same, and then they multiply to the likelihood, and they're plotted on a 4x4 grid. Definitely, you can do as many dimensions as mathematically possible to come up with a single number. And that single number will be your key. What is your acceptable level of risk reduction? And under the GDPR, from where we get our the philosophy there is that you can always reduce the risk. There are always measures that you can do to reduce the risk without sacrificing usability. So again, you have to have the process owner lead the conduct of the privacy impact assessment. That process owner is assisted by the data privacy office. The data privacy office can do it only for the first few times, just so the process owner has an idea of how to do it. But then from there on, the process owner has to take responsibility and accountability and then lead the conduct of the privacy impact assessment. Any division that handles ICT, HR, legal, your physical security, your cybersecurity, especially if your digital transformation is done, should be part of it. Any compliance or corp gov people should also be included. If you have any service providers, if there's a third party, then they should be included at the appropriate time. If you're large enough, then include civil society and your customers. And the reason why they should be included is because there will always be things that you do not see, except if you are the person using your system. So, what are some key considerations? You have one privacy impact assessment for every data processing system. So you get a full view of the processing that happens. When applicable, you should do it before you start your processing activity. Reduce everything into a report so you can have that report as a handy guide to evaluate your readiness. And you can you're not limited to one process. Although it's easy to have just one process, but you're not just limited to one process. Because a privacy impact assessment is really intrusive, you can use a threshold analysis to determine if your privacy impact assessment can be skipped. Because, and there's only one ground for it, there are minimal risks to the rights and freedoms of the data subjects. As a caveat, there is no standard form or set standard what constitutes minimal risks to the rights and freedoms of data subjects. So that's still a subjective line. Don't confuse minimal risks to the rights and freedoms of data subjects with minimal processing. Minimal processing just means that the data has undergone data minimization. It's also not to be confused with de minimis processing. Although you can use de minimis processing as a standard, de minimis processing does not mean that there are minimal risks to the rights and freedoms of data subjects. De minimis processing talks about processing that is very minimal, such as to be considered insignificant under the law. As with everything, preparation is key. You need to determine what your success rate is in terms of what your acceptable risk is. Whether it's risk reduction, risk avoidance, risk retention, whatever your risk management strategy, you need to set a goalpost as to what your acceptable risk of processing is. Then you mobilize. Right now, that's so easy because all you need to do is send the appropriate team members an email and then set a common time, and then you're done. But when we go back to face, this may be more more problematic, because then you have to provide snacks and you have to provide written output. Okay. Then you define your success. Again, I cannot emphasize that enough. So let's repeat. First, you have your threshold analysis. Sometimes you can do that through a questionnaire. Sometimes you can do it, by interview. How you get your threshold analysis, that's entirely up to you, but you need to have one, because you can't just be conducting a privacy impact assessment for everything. Then you get people to set aside time and effort and energy to do it. Then you set your criteria for success. And then you do all the other necessary admin stuff that's necessary to make sure that you all get there in the right frame of mind. And then you get information about the system. So what is the point? First, you want to identify, evaluate, and then manage the risks that you can see in the data processing. Then you also want to document what kind of processing is happening. That way you are able to build a bigger database of all the processing that happens within your organization. Once you are able to see that view, then you can readily look at the state of compliance with set standards. Where you are short, you have to establish a control framework that then allows you to stand on equal footing with those that do not have any weaknesses. So never people tell you, tao lang, or, we didn't really, it's just human to have errors. You get to minimize those errors when you have a framework that attacks those errors. So at the end of the day, you need to reduce it into a final report, and that final report should contain stakeholder involvement, any measures for risk management, and the process through which that report gets communicated to the stakeholders. What are you looking for anyway? You're looking for gaps. As I said last week, there is a gap when you have a violation of a data privacy principle, when the measures are inadequate to safeguard confidentiality, integrity, or the availability of the data, or there are undue restrictions on data subject rights. Kung sobrang higpit, problema din. Then you look at external and internal threats. So you get to look at external threats is through a security sweep, if it's a data, it's physical processing, or vulnerability assessment or penetration testing. Penetration testing, not or. Because sometimes it's good to have both. Then you look at internal threats. You pass it through code review as part of your secure software development lifecycle if you've passed your digital transformation. And not just because it's passed security doesn't mean it's already passed. You also have to pass it through stress testing. Will a large number of users accessing at the same time overwhelm the system? Then you evaluate the likelihood of the risk. Sometimes the nature of the data can increase risk. Sometimes the amount of data involved can increase the risk. For example, the national ID system that has a ton of data. And because it has a ton of data, in and of itself, it's a target. And you have to account for that. Then you look at the impact of possible harm. What if it's biometric data that gets out? You have to be able to identify how many data points is in the biometric system for the fingerprint reader. Sometimes fingerprint readers take only 3 points. Sometimes they have more. What is the system that's there? Or is it a scan of the entire fingerprint, which is even worse? So what is the effect of the gap on the controller or the processor? How much will they be liable if something bad happens? So you look at organizational threats and then you counter that with organizational measures. Organizational threats come from the nature of people. So sometimes it's a failure to recognize the existence of the threat because it's just not something you consider. Sometimes it's paper compliance, this focus, this laser-like focus on paper compliance because we're just fixing a checklist. Sometimes it's because there's no security incident response policy because it's not something they consider. Could be some cultural issues at play where there are some people who are sacred cows. Is there a culture of compliance inside the organization? Sometimes not. Or is the data vulnerable to social engineering? And in social engineering, there's a lot of pretense, a lot of fraud, a lot of deceit, a lot of trickery, in order for someone to gain the personal data. Just last week, I had a cousin come to me asking for help because my cousin was the victim of a social engineering attack. And it's not that easy to get back from it. Because under some contracts, you are deemed as you have provided sufficient authorization. Then we look at technical threats. Technical threats can include phishing, or when it's especially targeted, it's spear phishing. These are attacks meant to collect deliberately your own personal information. Could be from a poor configuration or backdoor vulnerability. Could be because you're used to removable media and USB drives. Or they could take command of your computer and then use your computer as a botnet to conduct denial of service attacks. Or you could be using cloud computing and not using the tools there properly and leaving the keys out for just anyone to enter. Finally, you have physical threats, such as home invasions or robberies. When people bring their laptops home, are they secure in their persons such that no neighbor is going to come in brandishing a gun or a knife and getting that laptop with all the sensitive personal information there? Do you have disgruntled employees? Do you have poor physical safeguards? Is your organization insistent on retaining paper-based systems? Or do you not mind the transfer between from paper to digital data? And then you have a lack of disposal policies where the data in paper form is just brought out to rot, or worse, put in a disposal container for for refuse in public, which constitutes in and of itself a crime. Then, based on the nature of those threats, then you apply control measure. Organizational control measures, physical control measures, and technical control measures. Doesn't end there. Once you've done with your privacy impact assessment workshop, no matter how long or short it is, you finalize the documentation, you determine if there are some questions that still need an NPC advisory opinion. You deploy the controls in coordination with other affected parties. You conduct field checks to assess effectiveness of controls, and I can't assess that enough. Just because your controls are deployed doesn't mean your job ends. You have to monitor it to make sure that it's applied and that you are getting the results you need. And then you determine when is it appropriate to schedule a formal review. So what happens if we do nothing? Again, fines for the institution and imprisonment for those personally responsible. So any of the general privacy principles, failure to comply with the conditions for consent, or a violation of any of the data subject rights, that's 1 to 5% of the annual gross income. when it's a failure to implement appropriate measures to protect the security of personal data, or you're failed to put your third party through the ringer so they can also apply personal data protection. Or you fail to report a breach within the required time. It's 0.5 to 3% of the annual gross income. When you fail to register, it's 50,000 to 100,000, and there's a failure to comply with any commission order. There's a fine not exceeding 50,000 plus the other fees and fines. A privacy impact assessment is your tool to avoid this from happening to your organization. And then on top of that, the fines don't take away the criminal penalties. And the fines that are here are imposed on the person, not the company. So if the company says, sige, do it, the company will take care of you. That doesn't really include this, because the company is looking at fines of its own. So if a company is earning 150 billion pesos a year, then 1% to 5% of that is going to be quite significant. Your privacy maturity model, where you are on your privacy maturity model, depends on how successful you are in being able to document where you stand with your data through a privacy impact assessment. So if you're able to understand where you are and what you're doing, then you go through defined. You are at defined, and that is baseline compliant. Because at that time, you're able to standardize your capabilities, and then you're able to document everything throughout the organization. But again, that's just the start. So once you are able to repeat your privacy impact assessments and you're able to deploy appropriate controls, and only time will tell you if your controls are appropriate, then you'll be at managed. And when finally it comes the time that your own employees are actively working and finding ways to improve your privacy, then you finally get to optimize. And so that's it for me. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Like, share, and subscribe. Back to you, Sam.
Yeah, thank you, Atty. Kiko. Talagang pang TED Talk lang yan So, yan. Wala pa si Abed sa kasi akala nila abuti na nga. Ang naiyon tayong dalawa dito. Si Engels also says to go. Oo.
Natulog si Abed.
Natulog si Abed Ayun dito.
Nakatulog na ba si Abed?
Hindi, mukhang pinipia yung bahay niya. Ayun, nakabalik na. Welcome back. Abed, okay lang. Diba? Alam nyo, ito talagang patikim lang itong pinakita ni Atty. Kiko. Kasi talaga, among the 5 pillars, ito yung kinakatakutan ng mga data protection officers.
Totoo yan.
Diba,
Totoo yan.
Bakit kaya? Bakit kaya? Ayan. Dito, ikaw muna.
Mahirap kasi. Actually, kung the broader view actually dyan sa PIA na yan, is risk management. Ikukuha ko lang, introduction do sa Cybersecurity 103 natin next week.
Yan.
Is kailangan yung leaders ng organizations, executive management, should put in yung risk management practice, not only for data privacy but also cybersecurity. Sa business continuity practice ko, halimbawa, may equivalent yung PIA. Ito yung tinatawag ng business impact analysis naman, which looks at the organization sa broader view. Kasi yung granularity sa data protection, mas focus yung finer granularity ang tinitingnan sa data privacy and data protection, protection of personal information. In contrast naman yung BIA, it looks at the universe of data that is handled and processed by the organization. So kailangan dyan talaga is may risk management practice yung organization din as a broader view. No?
Dito, saluhin ko lang yung sinabi mo, no? Yung sa tingin ko dito talaga, in-emphasize ni Atty. Kiko, napakahalaga na yung suporta ng top management. Di ba? Hindi pwede yung DPO lang papakawalan mo. Pinag-training mo lang ng 3 days, tapos nakapasa, tapos hahayaan mo na siya. Kawawa naman yung DPO, no? Oo, grabe. Meron palang kapatid si PIA, si BIA palang kapatid niya, di ba? Business Impact Analysis. So, yun po, sinabi na po ni ni ating godfather of cybersecurity dito, Aberia. Next week, siya naman ang pahinga ka muna, Atty. Kiko, ano? So, balik tayo Cybersecurity 103, yan. So, ang ating kabigang si Dito Aberia naman ang magbibigyan ng leadership, no? Cybersecurity for leaders ng kanyang team. Yan.
Yes.
Tama. Abet, ikaw.
Well, yung... Sinabi na Atty. Kicks, no, tama. Yung degree of difficulty, actually, hindi naman ganun kahirap, pero the common word that we encounter is mabusisi. Kasi nga, mas detailed di ba? And besides the fact na hindi lang technical or automated systems, pati manual, covered niya. Kaya lalong lumaki yung scope. In fact, we've talked about this a lot of times. The same security controls that you implement in information security, the same technical controls applies to the personal information. No? The thing nga lang again, papasok ko naman yung term ng mabusisi. Kasi sa buong data life cycle, chichikin mo yung security Kaya doon siya nagiging mabusisi. But the same controls apply, the same checks apply. In fact, if you look at yung mga policies ng, let's say, information security management system, mag-overlap siya sa mga kailangan ng data privacy.
Yep.
Kaya nagkaroon tuloy ng bagong ISO, di ba? For personal information management system. Because they are closely related. So, maganda yun, no? Actually, like we said, indirectly or directly, you are forced to look at your information security systems as well, because the Data Privacy Act requires you. And both fields always says CIA, confidentiality, integrity, availability.
Tama.
So, the application niya was extended for your usual sensitive information into personal information. So, yun.
So, Abet, maganda na mag-tandem mo yung CISO saka yung DPO, no? Di ba?
Natanong ko ito. Atty. Kicks, explain mo nga bakit hindi pwede maging DPO ang CISO.
Sabi ko sabay sila, hindi yung isang dalawa lahat. Magsabay sila DPO. Kahit take a CISO and vice versa. Yun.
Yeah, pero hindi pwede maging CISO yung DPO because you're looking at separate things.
Correct.
Pag may incident sa DPO, iba yung artifacts na hinahanap mo. Pag DPO incident, naghahanap ka ng kung sino yung pumasok, kung may nakitang data, tapos kung personal data yung na-affect. Yung personal data na na-affect, pag wala kang nakitang personal data na na-affect, exit ka na. You're not doing anything there, you're just contaminating the evidence. You're contaminating the artifacts. Leave. Pero pag InfoSec ka, you're looking more at how they were able to gain entry. Whether or not you were negligent. Data privacy, may negligence analysis pa yan eh. Pero CISO, no, you don't care if anyone was negligent. What you care about was napasukan yung data. And then you put in your controls to make it work. So they're two separate strands of thought. Isa yung ugat, isa yung language. Pero iba yung tinitingnan, ibang aspects. So one drives the front wheels, the other one drives the rear wheels. Separate
Kaya dapat maging best friend nyo. Kayo mga DPO friends natin, dapat best friend nyo si CISO.
Exactly.
Oh,
So, di nyo dapat inaaway yan.
Yan tayong isang colleague yan, si Laiko. Nag-agree siya kanina na mahirap ang PIA. So, tama yan. Dinagdagan pa ni Lito ng BIA, etc. So, and then, si Meridian Cruz, magandang hapon din po. Ayan. And si Smaji, Tony Kiko, ito yung keynote niya yung sinabi mo kanina. Yan, wind beneath your wings. Okay. May tanong ako, Atty. Kiko, ito, marami tayong members, siyempre sa BounceBack na network, mga micro and small and medium entrepreneurs, no? So, again, in your experience, mahirap bang gawin itong PIA? Kung maliit pa ng operations mo, di ba? Pero, ang dami mong, ang laki ng database mo pala. Yan, di ba? Di ba, online seller ka. Yung ating scenario last week, no? So, paano kung mga mag-PIA, for example, nag-Facebook Live ka? Di ba, business process yun no? So, sa Facebook Live mo, doon ka nagbebenta. Sabi, i-PM nyo sa akin yung number nyo, yung address mo, pwede-deliver ko sa ito. Yan. Itong scenario na ito sa online selling, for example, sa Facebook, as a business process, and then ipipia mo. Yan. So,
actually, mas madali nga pag mas magit ka eh. Kasi your processes generally are simpler because you're not going into AI, you're not going to, if ever you're going to do that, may naka-outsource yan to Facebook na find me these people who are like this. Hindi ikaw mismo yung gumagawa. You don't have any you don't have any control over that. So joint controllers kayo ni Facebook. But at some point, there's a limit to what you can control. Pero identifying it, just recognizing that there are those limits and there are problems, malaking bagay na yun. But you can do it, definitely. And it doesn't mean na may nakita kang problem, exit ka na. Also. May nakita kang problem, edi maghanap ka ng solution. And normally, the bigger nga the company, they've got solutions already for those problems. So it might be better. You get herd protection that way. So it's a lot easier if you're that small.
So may guidance sa NPC, di ba? You can go to privacy.gov.ph for the tools, ano? So kaya naman, di ba? Kaya naman, attorney, do it yourself.
Kaya yan.
Attorney, correct me if I'm wrong, no? Kasi most of the processes now are online, di ba? So, example, I'm subscribing to a cloud-based CRM. So, wala sa akin yung data. Does that mean that the responsibility is also transferred to the provider?
Hindi. The responsibility is still with you. So, hindi pwedeng hindi ako techie yung sagot mo. Or basta si provider na lang ang bahala doon. You have to have this innate understanding of how the provider is handling that information. Parang sasakyan yan eh. Magda-driver ka pero di ka marunong mag-ayos ng kotse pag may nagkaroon ng problem or at least point to what the problem is, then you're not, you need to find a better car. And parang, di ba, part of the rules of the road and part of the is that you understand how to maintain and protect your vehicle. In the same manner, if you're handling data, you have to understand how things are being done to the data that you control. Hindi pwedeng, hindi ko alam, basta sila yan. Basta dumadating sa akin, ayos na.
Yeah, actually,
go ahead.
Sample na ginawa ko, because yung isang kliyente ko, naka-outsource yung kanilang customer management system. Pati yung provider nila yung CRM nila, isinama namin sa PIA. In-involve namin sila as part of the exercise. Kasi, siyempre, mas malaki yung system nila, iba-ibang clients yung hinahandle nila, daming naka-outsource sa kanila. Mas malaki yung problema nila sa pagkabuo ng PIA nila. But then again, sabi ko doon sa kliyente, we have to get them involved in the process. So that when we have problems, madali nating tutukuyin together with them. Paghanap din doon sa problema, if there was a breach, identifying where the breach happened, when it happened, how many data subjects are affected, kailangan kasama yung provider. in determining what happened.
Correct, correct.
Sakto yun,
At
di ba?
saka po, kung pili tayo ng provider, standard na rin to, no? Tignan natin kung yung data center nila ay may kaukulang mga certifications, yung data nila or yung system nila is GDPR, di ba? So at least that offers us a sort of more comfort kumbaga dealing with them. Hindi porket nakakita tayo ng application, ang ganda nito, mura, di ba? Kunin mo na kagad, yung pala puro sama-sama yung data nyo, unencrypted, hindi siya SSL, di ba? So, those are the things that we also have to look out for outsourcing yung mga ganito. Tama sa dito, CRM, customer support, HR, di ba? Dami ng cloud HR.
HRIS, yes.
So, we should really look at that.
Precisely, Yung, merong di ba? May mga reported breaches na naman na nanggagaling sa developer. Di ba? Yung dito,
Lagi namang tinuturo yung developer eh.
Oo, correct.
Parati yan.
Kasi, developer naman kasi, well, probably to no fault of their own. Kasi, eto deadline, dapat naka-up na ng ganitong date. Siyempre, si developer, kahit ano gagawin, basta ma-up ng ganong date. Again, security nagiging afterthought. Yun yung, again, paulit-ulit na namin siya sabi ni Lito yan, nagsasawa na nga kami. Secure development life cycle. Habang dinidevelop, dapat nasa isip ko na kagad yung security.
Saka sa developer, correct. Magandang reference ng PIA output, di ba, kay developer. Kasi pag nakita niya, for example, isang business process na dine-develop niya, di ba yung HRIS, nakita niya na lahat ng gaps, di ba? So, pagka yung data flow, sinundan niya yan, madali na lang niya i-patch yung mga gaps na yan, di ba, from a technical perspective. So again, maganda involved nyo rin yung inyong third-party developer po pagka magkakaroon kayo ng privacy impact assessment. Okay, tanong ko naman, again, yung mga offshore nga, yung sinabi ni Abet, ano yung kailangan mong makuha sa kanila, Attorney Kiko, di ba? Kasi, for example, PIA mo, di ba? Oo.
May ISO certifications na for cybersecurity. And especially at the very minimum 27001 2 and 3.
Correct.
Tapos meron pang isa pang ISO yan for for offshore data centers. So it's not, we're not reinventing the wheel here. Meron ng mga certifications where you can rely na pag nandun ka na sa remote server na yan, meron ka ng herd immunity.
Sam, tatlo ang hihingin palagi sa'yo. Yung BCP, tapos data privacy, at saka 27001. Yan standard yan. Dapat may mapoprovide sila yan.
Yung best practice ka ng mga ng mga big Filipino companies ngayon dito sa Pilipinas. Sabi nila, kung yung vendor mo hindi compliant sa Data Privacy Act, don't do business with them. Diba? Ganun yung nakikita kong trend ngayon. Kasi nga, because of that 0.5 saka 3% clause, di ba, Attorney Kiko, na paparating na fines, no? Third party breach. Meron kang tama doon.
Hindi tapos na yung araw na masasabi mo kasi problema ng developer yan. Hindi.
So, yan. Kailangan, sa development talaga, dapat active involvement nung nagpapadevelop. Di ba? Right at the onset.
Nakakatawa sabi ni Attorney Kicks earlier, kailangan mo ng VAPT, VANPT. Yung VA, you see the holes, pero most of them kasi false positives. Yung PT, the penetration testing, confirms kung ano yung meron ka. But that's actually after the fact. Doon na roll out mo na or ita-testing mo na. Meron pang isa. Merong tinatawag na static code analysis or static application software testing. Bago mo i-launch, ipapasok mo yung code mo, titignan niya yung mga program bugs. So at least bago mo i-launch, may idea ka na anong mga bugs do sa application. So best practice, before the launch, perform a static code analysis, and after the launch, perform a dynamic code analysis or VAPT.
Yan, mga best practice yan galing sa ating mga information security expert, no? Tamang-tama. Oo.
Dagdagan ako before ka even bago ka pumasok sa static code analysis kasi mahal yun. Mag-code review ka muna.
Dating gigs, napakahirap ng code review, lalo na kung thousands yung codes, no? Kaya yung iba, sige, static code analysis na lang. Kasi automated.
Pero kung ikaw yung coder, nung nagko-code pa ako, yung ang dami mo kong nakukuha, binabasa ko lang yung code as is. And kung ikaw yung kung ikaw yung coder, and you have some professional pride in your work, babasahin mo lang siya eh.
Correct. Ay, Atty. Gigs, mas madali ngayon. Merong mga interactive coding coding application. Tinitignan na kagad yung security mo as you code.
Yes.
Yun.
Kaya madali na buhay nila ngayon eh.
Yan, maganda yan. Uy, may tanong tayo dito. May tanong tayo from Maricel. Comment din, si Maricel is following us, Laiko Iluna. Yan. Since, ayan, note ko lang Maricel, itong ating mga sessions, teaching sessions natin, we're going to upload them to our learning management system and then you can take an exam. Meron tayong certification program na kasama to. So thank you for following us. Meron siyang tanong, ito, maganda, related din sa discussion natin. How will PIA be affected by having an agile and project management approach? Yan.
Gandang tanong yan. Okay. Na-encounter ko yan, no? What agile means is that documentation follows later. You have to have your basics down pat. Pero pag tinanong nga sa'yo, ano yung, mabusisi, sabi nga ni Sir Abet, mabusisi itong PIA. So pag yung DPO or yung project lead, nag-drill down kung ano yung mga nakikita niyang gaps, dapat kaya mo siyang sagutin. And then may commitment ka to finish the control measures within a certified amount of time. Hindi ka na kailangan bigyan ng memo, hindi na kailangan i-reduce yan to writing. Immediately. Eventually, kailangan mo yan gawin because that's part of Agile. At the end, you need your documentation. But as it's being done, the whole point of Agile is to not let the paper get in the way. It doesn't stop you from doing the right thing.
It just delays it a bit, no? Because agile yung process. Pero di ba, Atty. Kicks, like Sam, it doesn't really matter anong development method ang gamit mo eh. At the end, you're still liable to give all the proper documentation and checks di ba?
Correct.
Right. Hindi, speaking of agile, dapat yung PIA mo, agile din yun. Kasi pagka may binago ka doon sa proseso in the middle of the development, ano ba patatamaan dito sa PIA ko? So, re-review mo rin ulit yung PIA mo. Baka kung ano yung tatamaan naman doon sa in-introduce mong bagong proseso. Diba? Kasi yung agile also involves yung discovery ng processes din yan eh. Na existing kasi, usually kasi sa mga organizations, meron na silang ways of doing things. Their processes are parang innate na dun sa kanila. Marami dyan nagpapadevelop, hindi documented yung procedure. Diba? Tapos gagamitin mo ng agile approach. Ang agile approach actually is a discovery method eh. Ano ba yung ginagawa mo sa datos? Ano ba yung proseso mo? So, sinasabi nga natin, the PIA must be conducted at the start of a project. Okay? Tapos yung approach mo kung agile sa development, yung PIA mo must also be responsive to that agile approach. Para hindi naiiwan.
Hindi ka pwede magkaroon ng static PIA. Lahat ng documents inside data privacy, living documents yan. Pag hindi ka naka-adjust dun sa changes in the project, what more with the changes in the threats? Madali pa yung changes in the project eh.
Oo.
Yan. Emphasize ko rin sinabi na dito, no? I don't know if you got it, na every time there's a new project, there's a new campaign, or there's a new group that's formed that will manage personal information, dapat po i-PIA nyo yan. Meron tayong question na, ito, matutuwa dito si Lito. Ito from our audience, paano yung mga political parties and party list groups na information heavy ang membership forms? Sino nagbabantay ng data? Yan, again, no? So, Atty. Kiko, political parties.
Hindi yung
Dapat ba
political
silang-
party.
Sila.
Sila.
Dapat may DPO rin sila.
Correct. Oo.
So,
Ibang organization yun.
Meron niyang sumubok, may sumubok diyan, no, na yun nga nag-organize na sila, kumukuha na ng volunteers. May nag-test ng system. Tapos ni-reveal, sabi marami daw butas yung system. Naku, patay, sabi kong ganun.
Naku, kilala natin yan, pero wag natin pangalanan nangyari, di ba? So, again, ginadali siguro, di ba, Abet? Ginadali, nilabas.
Hindi. I cannot reply. Kilala namin yung mga yun.
Kilala natin sila. We know
But
them.
bottom line is they should have done the proper checks. Again, software secure development life cycle. Again, the rush to put something out in the public. Walang pinag-iba sa mga COVID-19 applications.
Wala.
Every week meron, every mall meron, every store meron, every local government meron, every department in the government meron. So, yan.
Ay, nako. Alam natin yung nangyari doon, di ba?
What this experience taught all of us and should be teaching all of us all the time is that prevention is cheaper than the cure.
That's true.
True.
Nanghihinayang sila sa cost ng umpisa na hindi pa sila nagkakalat. When the bill comes, pag nagkalat ka, it's a lot higher.
Ayan na, 3 weeks na lang, ano? 3 weeks na lang.
3 weeks.
Nandiyan na yung new fine. So, teka, ito lang, Michael Santos, magandang hapon. Thank you for joining us. Okay? Kami tayo mga ano. And then, yan.
Kuya Mike, good PM.
CID Mike Santos.
Yan, Pumsi Castillo Adamos, magandang hapon din po. Thank you very much for joining us today. No? Marami pa tayong matututunan dito. Again, so na-identify na natin yung mga critical number 1 leadership support. Kailangan may suporta ka ng ng iyong C-level executives. No? Otherwise, talaga kawawa yung DPO. Things won't happen. Secondly, nakita ko sa inyo yung cooperation between the DPO and various units. No? Kailangan talaga, again, as a DPO, dapat magaling ka, ma-PR ka. Di ba? Pero at the same time, tough ka rin dapat, no? So, build the relationships kung DPO ka dun sa mga business unit partners nyo. Kasi again, sinabi nga ni Atty. Kiko, hindi po ang DPO ang may-ari ng PIA business process. Yung pong business owner, okay? Sila po ang magdadrive. Resource lang po sa DPO to ensure that a proper PIA happens, no? Tama ba? Tama. Oh. And at pangatlo, nakita natin, marami kayong pwedeng gamitin na standards para to fully operationalize your PIA. Yan. Lumabas ng agile. Hindi pa natin na-mention yung privacy by design, no? And security by design, diba? In addition to that, no? Kasi magta-transition na yan from the PIA to the privacy management program pag sinusulat mo na diba? Atty. Kiko, what happens kung ang ginawa mo sa PIA mo pahapyaw lang? Meaning ayan, sige, okay na yan. Pinaper compliance mo lang siya. Isa lang, tapos lahat yan. Ano mangyayari doon?
Magsasara ka ng online delivery service mo. Ganun na nga natin sabihin.
Yun pala yung magiging consequence sa isang Kasi po napakahalaga nitong privacy impact assessment.
Cease and desist.
Hindi nyo maitatawid di ba? Hindi ka makakatawid sa third pillar di ba?
Hindi.
I mean, kailangan talaga seryosohin mo tong second pillar na to ng DPA, yung privacy impact assessment. Kasi dito po manggagaling yung iyong mga isusulat sa iyong privacy management program at privacy manual at ang iyong mga i-implement, di ba? Ngayon, garbage in, garbage out, di ba? Paborito natin yan. So, kung garbage yung PIA mo, garbage din yung privacy management program mo. Di ba?
At saka sa PIA, dyan lalabas yung budget mo for security controls.
Yan.
Anong bibilin mo, di ba? Kaya again, tying back sa management support, kailangan ng management support kasi sila
kailangan may budget.
Mas maganda, Abet. So mas marami kang gaps na makita, Abet. Mas maganda, no? So,
huwag mo naman dagdagan, di ba?
Siyempre.
Alam niyo yung pag na-identify ng VAPT provider mo yung gaps, huwag mong i-dismiss na, kasi nasa system na yan, accepted risk na yan. Huwag mong ismalin yun. Because that security risk, no matter how small it is to you, is such a large open door to a person who knows how to enter it.
True.
Mm. Yan siguro magandang topic natin yan. Siguro i-discuss ba yan sa 103? Hindi pa no, hindi pa dito no. Let's do a deep dive on yan BAPT. Tapos yung mga ISO standards maganda rin.
Hindi pa.
Hindi mo na no.
Ibang exercise yung ano.
Malayo pa 'yon, malayo pa.
Oo.
Malayo pa 'yon. Advanced class.
Malayo pa.
Marami tayong topic. Tapos isa din lumabas kanina, yung mga solutions developers, kailangan din nila siguro ng ano, we can have a session with them. Let's invite some of them who've already been using yung best practices on data privacy in cybersecurity, no? Uy, marami pa tayong tagi-greet. Ito si Dean Cez Mercado, Ma'am Cez, magandang po. Gabi po from Baguio, okay?
Uy.
And also, yan, Sir Larry Carbonell, magandang gabi po sa inyo. Thank you very much po for joining us, no? Sana po marami po kayong natututunan sa aming mga huntahan. Nag-huntahan lang po kami dito eh. Tama-tama po eh. Okay, so, ito pa, question ko naman. Again, yung marami kang companies. Kaya tanongin ko, yung mga may sister company ka, di ba? Meron kayo isang conglomerate kayo. Yan, ano yung mga strategies na kailangan mong gawin dyan? Yan. Sa PIA, yan,
For me, if there's shared databases for efficiency, that's something where you can join forces with the subsidiary DPO team. Don't rely lang on the mothership DPO team kasi iba-iba yung priorities ng iba't ibang DPO team. They're there to make their processing more efficient for their own purpose. So, kailangan may mag-advocate din for the sub. Tapos, you always have to do it in a way na you are ready for the sub to be let go at any time. Kaya nga subsidiary yan eh. If the umbilical cord needs to be cut, you can cut it, no problem.
Kasi, Attorney Kicks, mahal daw mag-employ ng DPO for bawat subsidiary. Pwede ka naman mag-COP eh. Basta there's someone who advocates for that position.
Saka yun, again, we're actually moving to the realm of yung strategies for your PIA. No? Number one, ayaw nyo ma-disrupt yung business nyo. Okay? So, kailangan talaga, you need to really analyze how what your business is as a DPO. Partner with your operations team. What's the best way for us to conduct the PIAs without disrupting or causing only minor disruptions sa business? Kasi ayaw nyo siyempre matigil yung operations, diba? Yung sales, ayaw mong hilahin yan during daytime, no? Baka pwede after office kung papayag sila or Saturdays. Again, as a DPO, come up with a strategy, depending on the nature of your business, depending on the rhythm of your businesses, di ba? For example, marami kayong mga subsidiaries. And then, partner with your colleagues, so that you'll be able to come up with a more efficient way to roll out your PIAs. Madugo po yan kasi each PIA on the average, mga 3 hours po yan. So, ito, si Jane Tumondong. Good.
Actually, kasama yan sa pagka nag-engage ako ng project, kasama yan sa risk management din. Yeah, yung disruption to business tsaka involvement ng other parties.
Correct,
kung hindi sila available at a certain time, so may stretch yung project mo, madi-delay. Kasama yan sa risk management sa development or even dito sa DPA project.
Tama.
Sa naman yan, sa project management practice naman yan.
Ayan, oo. Baka gusto mong i-discuss yung briefly next week dito. Ito, si Jane Tumondong, I'm wide-eyed and all ears in this episode. It's taking me somewhere. Thank you. Yan. I want to know more. Thank you, NADPOP and PH-CERT. Yan. Jane, salamat po for joining us again today, in today's session. Ito talagang PIA, malapit sa puso namin yan, especially if you're a practitioner, Kasi dito talaga nagsisimula ang lahat. Well, nagsimula sa appointment mo as a DPO, pero ito yung first big test mo talaga if you'll be able to really plant the seeds so that a culture of privacy and security will emerge from your organization. Yan. So, yan. So we from 1.5 hours, we come to the end of our, again, any final words on PIA na gusto niyo pang i-discuss? Abet Lito, si Atty. Kiko ang ating last words So,
sige, well, ako, I'm looking at, kasi nga iba-iba yung practice ko, from project management, security, ito nga, ngayon, nasa privacy consultation. So, the bigger picture, the broader picture is really risk management. how do you manage your risks? Okay. And like I said, doon sa pagdating sa personal information protection or data privacy protection, the data that you are looking at and the processes that you're looking at are more granular. No, the granularity is finer. So doon ka nakafocus. So kailangan paglaanan ng oras 'yan kasi kung magkaroon ka ng problema later on, like Attorney Kiko said, mas malaki ang impact, no? Not only doon sa proseso nyo, pero doon sa fines and penalties na darating at saka yung fines and penalties na defined doon sa batas.
Tama. Thank you dito. Okay. Abet?
Actually, nabanggit na rin ni Attorney Kicks, let's also not kalimutan yung the benefit that you put into preparation. Pag dumayag ka sa PIA, malulunod ka. Kaya nga, diba, sa umpisa pa lang, mag-inventory ka na muna. Mag-inventory ka ng lahat ng systems mo na may personal information. Afterwards, pag nag-inventory ka na, then at least pag-jump mo ng PIA, meron ka ng set of, processes or systems na alam mong uunahin mo. Okay, so prioritization. The other thing that struck me when Attorney Keys was speaking is that projects, hindi systems. Kasi nga projects are continuing. It could be an old project na meron kang ginawang bago, pero may impact rin sa privacy, di ba? Kaya pala I notice sa mga privacy impact assessment forms, projects na kalagay. Madalas. Kasi pag may iteration ka, you also have to check if it affects yung mga ginawa mo dati. So, it's not static, it's a live document, and it's a cycle. So, habang may binabago, you have to do it again.
Tama. Oh. Thanks, Abet. Don't forget, para mabawasan din yung gagawin mo, yung threshold analysis, sinabi nga ni Attorney Kiko. Baka may mga projects yan na minimal lang yung risk. Diba? And kung marami yan na magkakamukhang projects, then pwede mo silang ilump together into one. Yun, tama.
Okay, so yun nga pala, gumawa ka na ng mga forms. Lahat to itatanong mo, gawin mo na. Tapos, ibigay mo na in advance para yung tatanong mo na lang, yung wala ron or yung hindi mo maintindihan. Although, yung mga sasagot is another story. Kasi madalas isang linggo, 2 linggo, 3 linggo, wala nangyayari. But yun, at least alam na nila beforehand kung ano yung information na kailangan nila po. Yeah.
Tama. Bago natin yung final word club, meron tayong audience po. Ayan, Martina from Cotabato City. Magandang gabi po dyan sa inyo. Salamat po. Okay. And another comment, di lang lumabas yung kanyang name. So best thing about data privacy is its value in GRC. Yan. Maganda rin yung topic yan. Definitely. Okay, Attorney Kiko, thank you very much again for being our speaker. Twice in a row. Okay, nakadalawa ka. 101 and 102. Babalik po si Attorney Kiko sa 103. Pero sisingit muna si Lito Averia sa Cybersecurity 103. Yan, nakapengen. So, may isa pa pala. Okay. From Data Protection PA, so mga kaibigan sa BBPH, agree with Sir Lito, risk management. I will add plus governance, plus compliance to complete the skill sets of the team. Yan, DRC nga tama. Okay. Maganda pala na. Thank you very much. And invite din natin sila as one of our speakers in the future. So, again, we also wish, shout out din. Okay, Attorney Kiko, again, thank you very much for your PIA, 102 na yan, di ba? And ito isang siyak malagang pillar. Oo, syempre. Okay, catch Attorney Kiko, meron pong naka-schedule na training ang NADPOP Academy sa Enderan. So, si Attorney Kiko po ang ating only certified NADPOP instructor in the Philippines. 4 stars. Yan. Attorney Kiko, again, your final words po from for our audience.
Siguro, obvious na, prevention is bigger than, more valuable than the cure. Kasi hindi lang fines, hindi lang yung penalties, yung babayaran mo to the professionals to help you get out of that hole, mas malaki din. Because, it's so much easier to do the prevention. And your best way to find out where you are supposed to prevent your stuff is when you conduct a privacy impact assessment that's very honest. You have to be honest with yourself. You have to be honest with your data subjects. And then only then you can apply the appropriate measures to protect yourself and the data that you have.
Yan, thank you, Atty. Kiko. Oh, shoutout din pala si Kat Alinea, ang head ng secretariat ng NADPOP, nasa backstage, okay? Listening to us and, observing. Kasi si Kat po tutulong na sa ating StreamYard management kasi si Sean, sira pa rin yung laptop. Pero ganun talaga. Okay.
Palitan mo lang kasi.
Naghihintay ng budget.
Pag nag-consult ka raw, eksaktuhin mo dun sa malapit na silang mahuli para tama, sabi ni Atty. Hicks, mas malaki yung charge mo kasi madali.
Again, 3 weeks ang countdown natin for the new fines to come in. So, yan. And at the same time, ito po shout out lang. Next month po ang 5th anniversary ng National Privacy Commission. So, pinaghahandaan po natin yan. Hopefully, again, ma-invite natin yung mga taga-NPC sa ating show. And on behalf of NADPOP, PH-CERT, and the BounceBack Network, thank you again for joining us on Privacy Fridays and FightBack Cybersecurity. So every Friday po, we're fighting back. Tama ba? And then sana, ayan, if you're already, kung nag-happy hour na kayo, again, join us again next Friday. Thank you very much. If you've learned a lot dito, please do, again, share to your friends, like our page, like the show. And then please, again, don't forget, prevention is better than tama, di ba? Thank you daw from Maricel again. Yan, salamat po Maricel for joining us again. And once again, this is Sam Jacoba with my colleagues, Atty. Kiko Acero, Abet de la Cruz, and of course, the godfather of cybersecurity, Lito Abreu, saying, Happy Privacy Fridays, FightBack Cybersecurity. See you again next Friday. Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Okay, bye guys.
Have a nice weekend.
Salam.